Orthodox Survival Course by Father Seraphim Rose and Father Podmoshensky. Lecture 6, The French Revolution, Part 3. 6. Religion. A. De-Christianization. November 1793. Lefebvre, Volume 2, 77-78. The Church is desecrated. The same thing happened in this revolution. But in 1793, the new revolution to replace Catholicism became apparent. And this is one of the standard Lefebvre textbooks, which is very objective and discusses this. In 1793, the festival of August 10th, the proclamation of the Republic, was purely secular. The new religion endowed itself with symbols and a form of liturgy, honored the Holy Mountain, that is, the place, the party of the mountain, and venerated its martyrs, Le Pelletier, Marat, and Chalier. On the 3 Brumaire, Year 2, October 24th, 1793, the convention adopted the revolutionary calendar. The year 1 was to begin with August 10th, 1792, the Republic. All the months are renamed in accordance with natural phenomena. That is, in December is called pleuvoir, which means rain, the rainy season, the rainy month, and so forth. It attempted to de-Christianize daily life by replacing references to religious ceremonies and the saints with names borrowed from tools and products familiar to the French. All the feast days were abolished, and the 7-day week was abolished also in favor of a 10-day week. That is, there's no more Sunday. In 1793, November, a report concerning civic festivals constituted the prelude to the official organization of the new national religion. At Nevers, on September 22, 1793, a festival was celebrated in the cathedral in honor of Brutus. In this province in October of 1793, all religious ceremonies outside churches were abolished, and funeral processions and cemeteries were secularized. Other local provinces adopted similar policies. The district of Corbeil declared that the majority of persons under its jurisdiction no longer desired the Catholic form of worship. In November 6, 1793, the Bishop of Paris resigned under compulsion and said that he had been deceived. On the 17th of November, he came with his vicars to the convention to confirm his action officially. A festival of liberty was planned for 20 Brumaire, Year 2, November 10th, 1793, to celebrate the victory of philosophy over fanaticism. The Commune seized Notre Dame Cathedral. A mountain was built in the choir, and an actress impersonated liberty. Informed of this, the convention proceeded to the cathedral, now called the Temple of Reason, and attended a second celebration of the civic festival. By the way, they burned in effigy the image of atheism, because the revolution is not atheist, it's deistic. Some sections, provinces, followed this example. On the 30th, November 20, the citizens of the Unity section, adorned with priestly symbols, paraded before the convention, singing and dancing. And on November 23, 1793, the churches were closed. Temple of Reason, Dawson, 121 through 122. We have some sources which show and give insight into the spirit of these celebrations of reason. For example, in the city of Chalons-en-le-Marne, there's the following description of the inauguration of a Temple of Reason. The festival was announced in the whole commune the evening before, For this purpose, retreat was sounded by all the drummers and by the trumpeters of the troops in barracks at Chalons and all parts of town. The next day at daybreak it was again announced by general quarters, which was likewise sounded in all parts. The former church of Notre Dame was, for lack of time and means, cleaned and prepared only provisionally for its new use, and in its former sanctuary there was erected a pedestal supporting the symbolic statue of Reason. It is of simple and free design. This is an eyewitness account. It is of simple and free design, decorated only by an inset bearing this inscription: "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." It was flanked by 2 columns surrounded by 2 antique bronze perfume boxes, which emitted incense smoke during the whole ceremony. In front, at the foot of 3 steps, was placed an altar of antique form, on which were to be placed the emblems of the various groups composing the procession, would be put there. On the 4 pillars of the corners of the sanctuary were 4 projecting brackets to receive the bust of Brutus, and he's the enemy of tyranny, the father of the republics and the model of republicans, of Marat, the faithful friend of the people, who was a vicious killer, of Lepelletier, who died for the republic, and the immortal Chalier. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, the general assemblage formed on the gravel promenade, otherwise called the Promenade of Liberty. The military detachments and other groups destined to form the procession had their places indicated there. Commissioners from the society arranged them in order. A detachment of cavalry, national constabulary, and hussars mingled together to strengthen the bonds of fraternity leading the march. And on their pennant were these words: "Reason guides us and enlightens us." It was followed by the company of cannoneers of Chalons, preceded by a banner with this inscription: "Death to the tyrants." This company was followed by a cart loaded with broken chains, on which were 6 prisoners of war and a few wounded being cared for by a surgeon. This cart carried 2 banners front and back with these 2 inscriptions: "Humanity is a republican virtue," and "They were very mistaken in fighting for tyrants," that is, these prisoners of war. This cart was accompanied by 2 detachments of National Guardsmen and regular troops fully armed. Other people carried banners with the words, "Let us be united like it," like the tricolored flag. "Nothing can conquer us." 40 women citizens dressed in white and decorated with tricolor ribbons carried a large tricolor ribbon tied to each head. A Liberty bonnet crowned this banner, and young National Guardsmen accompanied them, carrying various pennants on which were written various mottos. In its train, groups of children of both sexes carried baskets of fruit and vases of flowers, accompanying a cart drawn by 2 white horses. In the cart was a young woman nursing an infant. Beside her, a group of children of different ages. It was preceded by a banner with this inscription: "They are the hope of the fatherland." From the cart flew a tricolor streamer with this inscription: "The virtuous mother will produce defenders for the fatherland." This van was followed by a chariot of antique type, decorated with oak branches, and bearing a sexagenarian couple, with a streamer on which was written these words: "Respect old age." Again there was a group of National Guardsmen united arm in arm, singing hymns to liberty and bearing 2 banners bearing these inscriptions: "Our unity is our strength," and "We will exterminate the last of the despots." Next marched a group of women with tricolor ribbons bearing a standard with this inscription: "Austere morals will strengthen the Republic." All who composed this group were dressed in white, as were the drivers of the cart, and all were bedecked with tricolor ribbons. Then followed the surveillance committees, that is, the GPU, grouped one after another. In front were 4 banners, each bearing the name of a section and an emblem depicting a finger on the lips to indicate secrecy, and another banner with this inscription: "Our institution purges society of a multitude of suspicious people." The Republic section went first. It accompanied a chariot pulled by 2 white horses and led by 2 men on foot, dressed in Roman style. In it was a woman dressed in the same way, representing the Republic. On the front of this chariot appeared a tricolor ensign bearing these words: "Government of the Wise." Next marched the Equality section, accompanying a plow pulled by 2 oxen and guided by a cultivator in work clothes. A couple seated on it carried a standard on which were written on one side, "Honor the plow," and on the other, "Respect conjugal love." The principal inspector and all the employees in the military storehouses formed a group which followed the plow. 2 standards were carried by this group. The first had the words "Military Supplies," and the second, "Our activity produces abundance in our armies." Then marched the fraternity section, consoling groups of convalescents whose physicians were close by. In the middle of this section was an open cart from the Montagna Hospital containing men wounded in the defense of the fatherland, who appeared to have been cared for and bled by health officers who were binding their wounds. They were partly covered by their bloody bandages. The front of this cart carried a banner with this inscription: "Our blood will never cease to flow for the safety of the fatherland." After the committees followed 4 women citizens dressed in white and adorned with tricolored belts, decorated with the attributes of the 4 seasons. After the 4 seasons came the people's representative in the midst of the constituted authorities, civil and judicial, wearing their distinctive insignia. Each citizen held in his hand a wheat stalk, and on the banner which preceded the constituted authorities was this inscription: "From the enforcement of the laws come prosperity and abundance." These were followed by various staff officers of the National Guard, who were preceded by a banner saying, "Destroy the tyrants or die." Next, the illegitimate children of the fatherland were led by a woman bearing a banner: "The fatherland adopts us. We are eager to serve it." Finally, the old people, represented by veterans without weapons, preceded by 2 banners on which were the inscriptions: "The dawn of reason and liberty embellishes the end of our life," and "The French Republic honors loyalty, courage, old age, filial piety, misfortune. It places its constitution under the safeguarding of all the virtues." Finally, there was a pause for singing patriotic songs. On the front steps of the city hall there had been built and painted a mountain, at the top of which was placed a Hercules defending a fasces 14 feet in height. A tricolor flag flew above it, on which was written in large letters, "To the mountain from the grateful French." That is, like saying, "To the Bolsheviks." At the foot of the mountain, pure water flowed from a spring, falling by various cascades. 12 men dressed as mountaineers, armed with pikes and with civic crowns on their heads, were hidden in caverns in the mountain. As the procession arrived, singing the last couplet of the Marseillaise, the mountaineers quietly came out of their caverns without fully revealing themselves, and when "To arms, citizens" was sung, they ran to get axes to defend their retreat, posted themselves on different sides of the mountain. But seeing the cart with feudalism and fanaticism, drawn by donkeys with mitres on their heads, they ran towards them, axe in hand, grabbed the mitres, copes, and chasubles which adorned them, as well as the Pope and his acolytes, and chained them to the chariot of liberty. During this, the band played a military charge. The mountaineers, seeing other carts arrive and feigning to believe that they were only the train following the one containing fanaticism, advanced in their column to meet the first one they saw, which was the chariot of liberty. They lowered their axes as a sign of respect, and the band played a march. Then a litter appeared, supporting a choir decorated with garlands. The goddess descended from her cart, seated herself on the chair, and was borne by 8 mountaineers to the foot of the mountain. She was followed by 2 nymphs, one of whom was carrying a tricolored flag, and the other the Declaration of the Rights of Man. They marched upon the trash remnants of nobility and superstition, which were then burned to the great contentment of all the citizens, and climbing the mountain with people's representative, Pledger, then present at this festival, and mountaineers who represented his colleagues while the band played, where can one better be than in the bosom of one's family, reached the summit. The goddess was crowned by the Graces. Then a tricolored flag was displayed, and they sang, "Our country's 3 colors." And still on the mountain they sang, "When from the mountain peaks the sun." The procession descended. The goddess stopped at the spring. A vase was presented to her by the president of the commune. She drank some water from the mountain, then presented some to the people's representative, to all the constituted authorities, citizens, and officers of the different corps present, who all drank to the health of the Republic, one and indivisible, and of the mountain, the party. The goddess again on her chair was borne to her chariot by 8 mountaineers. 4 others placed themselves at her side, axes raised to drive away the profane. The others took their places with the administrative bodies to indicate that public dignitaries are consistent with virtue alone. From there they went to the Temple of Reason. All the musicians gathered behind the altar with the singers. At the moment when the procession entered the temple, the organ blared an overture, and the Société Populaire, the constituted authorities, the surveillance committees, GPU, and the groups described above took places in rows facing the altar of reason in a certain distance from it. The military band played hymns to reason, to liberty, to hatred for tyrants, and to sacred love for the fatherland, after which the president of the Société Populaire delivered the inaugural speech. The commune president and others delivered speeches as well. After their harangues, various patriotic hymns were repeated and accompanied by the military band, after which, in front of the temple entrance, the trumpeters announced that the inauguration festival and the ceremony were concluded. In the evening, fireworks were displayed on the mountain. A bouquet marked the gratitude of all the French to the mountaineers present, who were solemnly recognized to be the saviors of the Republic. Then a ball was held, and so brotherhood was twice celebrated in a single day. Each citizen taking part in this fine day evidenced this civic spirit. All took the oath to live in freedom or to die. But this is very much in harmony with, of course, communist celebrations of various kinds, very rational, very ordered, very artificial. The triumph of the abstract mind, which is the sign of reason, is the highest reality. One asks how all this fits together, and we'll see later on how it all fits together, because we want to examine both the reaction against this in the 19th century and the further development of the revolutionary ideas. Already we can gain one idea, which is very central to all of this, and that is that this whole revolution, with these various strands, is very much like a secular form of something we already saw in the Renaissance period, that is, the Chiliastic sects. Now there's a goddess of reason, the same idea that there's this new order of the ages. History is now coming to an end. So far, we see no talk of the third age of the Holy Spirit, because it's all couched in rationalistic terms. But this is very much an outbreak of that same spirit. Now it's much broader and takes over the whole society. We'll see later on how deep this Chiliastic strain goes into modern man. Napoleon. And now we come to the last aspect of the revolution, which is that of Napoleon. With Napoleon, the revolution actually comes to an end, that is, this bloody part. The whole of Europe is convulsed. Half of it is welcoming the revolution, until it sees all the blood, and begins to get a little upset. But still, many people are welcoming revolution, and another half of it is horrified by it, and they begin to fight. And the French armies go out beyond the border, carrying the revolution abroad. They saw how the Goethe, Beethoven, and others think it's a wonderful thing, bringing liberty and equality to mankind. And then comes one very talented and clever man, Napoleon, who takes over the whole thing and becomes, over 15 years, the dictator for France. In many ways, he offers a compromise. That is, he restores the church. In fact, gives the church. He has a concordat with the Pope, which gives the Pope much more power over the French church than he had before. He restores the churches. He even restores a new kind of nobility and establishes an empire, a new monarchy, but preserving the advantages of the revolution. That is, he has a new law code. He dissolves the whole idea that there are different castes in society. All are supposed to be equal, at least theoretically, before the law. And we'll look at a few aspects of his life, which are not too often talked about, which were: there's a book by Dmitry Merezhkovsky, a Russian, crazy Russian, who, however, was very much attuned to Napoleon's mystical ideas, so he quotes from many of his letters. To begin with, he has a frontispiece, the motto for the whole book, a quote from Pushkin, who calls Napoleon the faithful executor of a command unknown. That is, the idea that he is representing something, he knows not what. He himself is very aware of being on the crest of some movement in history, and as long as that movement supports him, he can go forward and conquer the world. And when it departs, he feels he loses everything. This Merezhkovsky calls Napoleon, the titan who bridled the chaos, the revolution. He took over and gave it order. There's a Catholic thinker from the 19th century, Leon Bloy, who talks about Napoleon. He says, Napoleon cannot be explained. He is the most inscrutable of men, because he is primarily and above all the prototype of him who must come and who, perhaps, is not far distant. He is the prototype and forerunner, closely akin to us, who among us, Frenchmen or even foreigners, living at the end of the 19th century, but has felt the illimitable sadness of the consummation of this incomparable epic, who possessed with but an atom of a soul, but was not overwhelmed by the thought of the verily too sudden downfall of the great empire and its leader, who was not oppressed by the remembrance that but yesterday, so it seemed, men were on the highest pinnacle possible to humanity, because of the mere presence of this beloved, miraculous, and terrible being, the like of whom had never been seen in the world, and could, like the first human beings in paradise, deem themselves Lord of all God's creation, and now immediately after must again be cast back into the age-long mud of the Bourbons dynasty, because after Napoleon the monarchy was restored, and now immediately after must again be cast back into the age-long mud of the Bourbons dynasty, because after Napoleon the monarchy was restored. He, Napoleon, himself, speaks of himself as someone who is very much one of the people, even though he was himself from some kind of little nobility. He says, "Popular fiber responds to mine. I am come from the ranks of the people, and my voice has influence over them. Great was my material power," he said, "but my spiritual power was infinitely greater. It bordered on magic. When the people died for Napoleon, they died for someone whom, as Victor Hugo writes, understanding that they were going to die, they saluted their God, who was standing in the midst of the tempest, that is, Napoleon as a deity. On his return to Paris from Elba, that is, when he was first banished to Elba off the coast of France, and then came back for a brief period before Waterloo, he came into the palace of the Tuileries in Paris, and those who carried him were frantic, beside themselves with joy, and thousands of others deemed themselves happy to be able to kiss or even touch the hem of his garments. Methought I was present at Christ's resurrection, says one witness. When I was a child, writes this same Leon Bloy, I knew old veterans who could not distinguish him, Napoleon, from the Son of God. Napoleon himself writes in his testament which he left, I die in the Roman apostolical religion in the bosom of which I was born. And in fact he lived. He was a member of the Roman Catholic Church, but in ideas totally foreign to it. And he said, in fact, I prefer Islam. At least it is not as absurd as our religion. Napoleon is a demoniac being, says Goethe, using the word daemon in its antique pagan sense, neither god nor devil, but someone betwixt the two. There was an apocalyptic strain which runs throughout the whole Napoleonic mystery. It originated earlier still with the Revolution, when at times it reached such a pitch that it is almost akin to the early Christian eschatology, a premonition of the world's approaching end. This, of course, is very accurate because this is a Chiliastic movement. The end of all things is at hand. There will be a new heaven and new earth. The ancient dream of paradise lost, of God's kingdom on earth as in heaven, together with a new vision of a human kingdom of liberty, equality, and fraternity, drew men towards Napoleon. Napoleon is the soul of the revolution. I am the French Revolution, says he, as he begins the empire, And at end, he says, the empire is the revolution. He was a bad man, an evil man, he says of Rousseau, standing over his grave. Without him, there would have been no French Revolution. It is true that I, too, would not have existed. Perhaps that would have been better for the happiness of France. Your Rousseau is a madman. It is he who has brought me to this. Time will show whether it would not have been better for the peace of the world if neither Rousseau nor I had lived. Still, he was very much the spokesman of the revolution. He says of himself, I closed up the chasm of anarchy. I put an end to chaos. I cleansed the revolution. He goes on to say, in spite of all its atrocities, the revolution was the true cause of our moral regeneration. He goes on to say, in spite of all its atrocities, the revolution was the true cause of our moral regeneration. Thus, the most foul-smelling manure produces the most noble vegetation. Men may restrain or temporarily suppress this progress, but are powerless to crush it. Nothing can destroy or efface the great principles of the revolution. Its sublime truths will endure forever in the light of the wonderful deeds we have done, in the halo of glory with which we surrounded them. Already they are immortal. They live in Great Britain, shed their light in America, have become the heritage of the French nation. They are the torch which will illuminate the world. They will become the religion of all nations, and, say what you will, this new epoch will be associated with my name, because I kindled the torch and shed a light on its beginnings, and now, through persecution, I will be forever acclaimed as its Messiah. Friends and foes alike will call me the first soldier of the revolution, its champion leader. When I am no more, I shall remain for all nations the beacon star of their rights, and my name will be their battle cry, the slogan of their hopes. As to the dichotomy between liberty and equality, which, as anyone knows, exclude each other, he says, better abolish liberty than equality. It is the spirit of the times, and I wish to be a son of my times. Liberty is the need of the few elect. It can be constrained with impunity, but equality is pleasing to the majority. This, Merezkovsky quite rightly notes that the revolution seceded from Christianity in everything, save in the idea of universality. Dostoevsky writes, as a matter of fact, the French Revolution was nothing more than the last variation and reincarnation of the same ancient Roman formula of universal unity, which, by the way, we discovered earlier is one of the main themes of modern thought. Napoleon says it himself, my ambition? It was of the highest and noblest kind that ever perhaps existed, that of establishing and consecrating the empire of reason, and the full exercise and enjoyment of all human faculties. And he wanted to march on Asia. Before he became emperor, he was in Egypt and came back to take over France. For him, Europe was but the route to Asia. He said, your Europe is a molehill. Only in the East have there been great empires and mighty upheavals. In the East, where dwell 600 million people. The lure of the East, says this Merezkovsky, grips him all his life. In Europe, before the Syrian campaign, young General Bonaparte, poring for hours on the ground over huge outspread maps, dreams of a march to India across Mesopotamia, following the route of Alexander the Great. He says, "With overwhelming forces I shall enter Constantinople, overthrow the Sultan, and found the new and great empire of the Orient. This will bring me immortal fame." Now we see about how he surrounds himself with a mysticism. At St. Helena, when he's in final exile, he says, "I always realized the necessity of mystery. I always realized that my ends could best be served by surrounding myself with a halo of mystery, which has such a strong fascination for the multitude. It fires the imagination, paves the way to those brilliant and dramatic effects which give one such power over men. This was the cause of my unfortunate march to Moscow. Had I been more deliberate, I might have averted every evil, but I could not delay it. It was necessary that my movement and success should seem, as it were, supernatural." And about religion, he says, "I created a new religion. Already I pictured myself on the road to Asia, riding on an elephant with a turban on my head and carrying a new Koran, written by myself, a new sacred book." Napoleon realized that, as he said, as soon as a man becomes king, he is a separate being from his fellow men. I always admired Alexander's, the Great, sound political instinct, which prompted him to proclaim his divine origin. "Had I not returned from Moscow," he says, "as a conqueror, I should have had the world at my feet. All nations would have admired and blessed me. I might have withdrawn myself mysteriously from the world, and popular credulity would have revived the fable of Romulus. It would have said that I had been carried up to heaven to take my place among the gods." He realized that our life and time were not appropriate for calling himself God. He says, "Now were I to declare myself the Son of the Father Almighty, and order a thanksgiving service on the occasion, every fishwife in Paris would jeer at me to my face. No, the people are too civilized nowadays. There is nothing great left for me to do." He used the Catholic faith, as he himself says, "Would you like me to invent some new and unknown religion according to my fantasy? No, I hold a different view on the matter. I need the old Catholic faith. It alone retains its grip on all hearts, and alone can turn the hearts of people towards me and remove all obstacles from my path." But on St. Helena, he notes that he had aims beyond conquering the world. He says, "I should have governed the religious with the same facility as the political world. I intended to exalt the Pope beyond measure, to surround him with grandeur and honors. I should have succeeded in suppressing all his anxiety for the loss of his temporal power. I should have made an idol of him. He would have remained near my person. Paris would have become the capital of Christendom, and I should have governed the religious as well as the political world." And so we see some of these mystical ideas of Napoleon and other important things. We have in him, the first time in the modern age, a world conqueror, someone who consciously wanted to conquer the world, and even perhaps set himself up as a god. He saw himself as the successor of the Roman Empire, after he defeated the Russians at Austerlitz in 1807 and the Germans in 1806. In fact, the Germans were so afraid that he would take the crown of the Holy Roman Empire that the Emperor of Austria abolished the Holy Roman Empire in 1806. Napoleon announced in 1807, after defeating the Russians, that "I am now the Roman Emperor, because I have defeated the first Rome, the Holy Roman Empire, and the third Rome, which is Moscow, and I am now the heir of both. And a third aspect is his attitude towards the Jews. The age of revolution was preceded immediately by much agitation in favor of the Jews, especially on the part of very enlightened Jewish philosophers like Moses Mendelssohn and the liberal radical Jews who wanted to abolish the separate ghettos and so forth. In fact, the revolution gave a great deal of so-called, quote, freedom to the Jews. In every place, the revolution is usually accompanied by emancipation of the Jews. That we'll go back to later on, that aspect. The most interesting thing about Napoleon and the Jews is that after he had proclaimed himself emperor, he called from all over the world a meeting of the Sanhedrin, which was the Jewish high court which condemned Christ to death, and had not existed since the time of the fall of Jerusalem after the death of Christ. He called back this organization into existence for one purpose, so that the Jewish people would proclaim him to be emperor. There's even an illustration of him at the Sanhedrin meeting in order to proclaim him emperor. It is in a book I lost. One asks the question how these, certainly there's many enlightened and modern ideas here. He's obviously a child of the Enlightenment. Wonders how this whole idea of an empire, of a monarchy, a restored monarchy, fits in with the ideals of the revolution, which is a democracy and a state of equality. How does it fit? And how could he be recognized as the carrier of the revolutionary ideal? In fact, wherever he went, his armies were tremendously enthusiastic because they felt they had an ideology. They were carrying the message of truth to other peoples. Obviously, it's bound up with this Chiliastic revolutionary ideal. For now, we won't say much more about it, but we find later on other examples of this phenomenon occurring again. But there are different strands of the revolution, and the strand which Napoleon most evoked was this, which we've talked about before, the ideal of universal monarchy, which makes him one of the forerunners of Antichrist. The very thought that he could be proclaimed a god after conquering the world, that he would be conqueror of the world, one world ruler, that he is the Roman emperor, and that the Jews proclaim him as the emperor, that is, almost Messiah, shows that he has very definitely, more than anyone before him in modern times, is a forerunner of Antichrist. And we will see later there is one other person so far in modern history who had a similar function. In fact, almost all these things have the same ideas, and that's Hitler. And this whole revolution, beginning with the proclamation of the rights of man and equality through the bloody massacres and deliberate depopulation, proclamation of communism, the coming to power of one ruler who wanted to be ruler of the world. All of this is a rehearsal for a future kingdom of this world. And once Napoleon was removed and the monarchy was restored, we'll see that it was not a real restoration. These revolutionary ideas begin to be much more powerful, and the whole of the European intellectual class now becomes filled with these ideas. They change a few ideas, but the basic ideal remains the same. There are some thinkers who go a little deeper into the question. Some are more superficial. We will examine the views of the various ones and also the revolutionary outbreaks which they inspired. But to understand the revolution, we have to see it not as something which is complete in itself, but as something which is an attempt of breaking through of the new forces, the new Chiliastic forces. Later on, these forces are able to take over not just most of Europe, but now most of the world. Because meanwhile, this process of apostasy, of the mystery of iniquity, has gone much deeper and entered into the lives of now everybody in the world. This concludes the reading of Lecture 6 in Orthodox Survival Course. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and check out my social media in the description. Thank you, and God bless.